Okay. So fighting for human rights, like tell me a little bit about that.
I started to learn that these women, a lot of them, they were being forced and they were coerced into this situation. The issue of human trafficking was barely talked about. I'm like, there's no such thing as child prostitute. There's children who are prostituted, but child prostitute or child pornography, like those words don't go together. Prostitute should equate choice, pornography should equate choice. And when you put a minor in that situation, it's never choice. And I will argue that till the day I die. And so my mission, my heart was to amplify their stories, to amplify their voices. And I had no clue that it was going to turn into starting an organization 7 years later and doing all of the work in Canada that we've done. And, we've gone on to change legislation federally in Canada a handful of times. I just knew I wanted to do something. And I think that's the power of, if you do something, something might happen. If you do nothing, absolutely nothing will happen.
This is everything they never told you about real estate with the AI queen, Carrie Soave, sharing the tech, tools, and lead gen strategies that top producers won't tell you about. Now, here's your host, Carrie.
Welcome back, all of my listeners. Today's guest is what happens when you mix real estate royalty, TEDx stages, and a frontline activism into one person. She sold some of Canada's most iconic homes, battled human trafficking in Parliament, and now splits her time between Toronto and Costa Rica, living out what she preaches: freedom, purpose, and power. Please welcome the Ultimate Freedom CEO, Shay Invidiata. Shay, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and what a beautiful, warm welcome. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you, AI.
Yeah. I would expect nothing less since this is your podcast. Hello.
Right? It's actually, I never used AI for any of my podcast stuff until deep research came out in ChatGPT. And I don't know if you use that yet, but it can take, if you use the deep research option, it could take anywhere from 5 minutes to 30 minutes. And it deep dives and finds the goods. Like, it is fantastic. So now I have to use it because it's just a total time saver. I still don't use it for questions because I'm very casual. My podcast is just very like an easygoing flow. And I feel like if I can't have a conversation with somebody in a casual way that's entertaining, then I probably shouldn't have a podcast.
Just not speak to them, because if that takes, like, I understand what you're saying, and it's like, it should flow, ease and flow, right? Otherwise, don't talk to that person.
Right? So much to unpack. I have so many questions for you. My guests are going to have a lot of questions for you. So Shay, I've been following you for a while. You were with EXP. I'm not even sure if you still are. Are you still with EXP or?
I'm not, and it's not that I was hiding it, but I kind of made it a quiet exit. So I'm not with them. And, my father and his team moved back over to Remax, and it's a much longer story, which, if it's of interest, we can definitely unpack some of that there. But I made a decision since I was coming back into Canada for a longer period of time and spending more time here than I was Costa Rica, it just made more sense for me to be realigned with the team 100%. Like, while I was abroad, still working with, of course, my team, but it was in a different structured capacity. And now being here, it's confusing. It's confusing to the market to be like, you're EXP, but you're Invidiata, and Invidiata is, Remax. And
it was kind of confusing for a lot of people, I feel like.
Yeah. And so, when I was away in Costa Rica, and EXP being a very international brand, having not having to have a brick and mortar footprint, and what I was aimed to do in Costa Rica for Costa Rica, bringing EXP there, that was like part of what I was doing down there. It just made more sense for me to stay there and then kind of work on like a referral structure. My clients still know me as Invidiata. Obviously, it's my last name. It's not going anywhere. And so we just had kind of like a co-listing structure, if you will, with my team. But then when I'm back here more full time, it's like, well, it just no longer made sense. And so when something doesn't make sense, in my notorious line that is not, trademarked by me by any means, but since 2020, my notorious line is make it make sense. Very simple with everything in life. Just make it make sense, right? And if it didn't make sense, it's like, well, then why are you doing that? And so that's a long story short. There's obviously more layers to it, but I was just going to be here and it didn't make sense. So no, I'm not with EXP. Still love the brand, still love the leadership, have a lot of respect for them. I'm actually meeting up with one of them next week for lunch, part of the exec team. So, I still have a great relationship with them, but for this season, we'll call it, of life, it made more sense for me to go back to Remax.
And just because this is an international podcast, just in case anybody doesn't know, Shay's dad is Christopher Invidiata, who is he's like an icon for real estate here. I feel like in the province of Ontario where we are, there's very few names that the regular consumer will know when they talk about real estate. And I think that your dad's is one of them. And he is known for luxury real estate. So if you have ever driven down Lakeshore in Ontario, anywhere around Oakville, Mississauga, you've definitely seen his signs. So, because your dad's been in real estate a really long time. So you pretty much grew up in real estate.
Well, it's funny when people say that to me, like, how long have you been in real estate? I'm like, my entire life. So you are spot on. I just turned 40 last year, and my father will be 40 years in real estate this year. So yeah, literally grew up in it. I'm part of the reason why he transitioned from his career before into real estate, because I was a wee little one just being born and I was pulling myself up for the first time, and he was across the country he's selling Italian fine goods, like, clothing and what we call like the schmutta business, and doing fine jewelry. But it had him taking him away from being localized. And so when my mom called and said, your daughter's picking yourself up for the first time, and he thought, what am I doing so far away from home? And so he wanted to find something that was still luxury with a higher price tag and that would keep him local. And so that's one of the main reasons why he chose real estate. And as you said, we're known still today for being leaders in the luxury market.
Yeah, great. That's so good for you. I always thought when I first got into real estate, I'm like, I think, because I never thought I wanted to ever join a team. This was 15 years ago. There weren't a lot of teams out there. And I'm like, I feel like if I could work for him, I would join a team. Just has such a great reputation, and just such like, when you think I feel like he's the original, real estate. He should be, right? That's how I associate the name and the brand. So well done on branding, because you think luxury real estate and you think Invidiata, 100%.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So fighting for human rights, like, how did this shift? Like, tell me a little bit about that.
Like how I got into it, or how
you got into it and exactly what you did.
Well, I always wanted to go study abroad, and from a very young age, my first plane ride was 2 weeks old. So I was very introduced to traveling, was like part of my norm growing up. And I had an opportunity to go to do a summer program in Italy, and realizing like you learn so much more abroad than you do where obviously you're living, right? Like you're learning a new culture, new language, government system, all kinds of things. Anyways, I had chosen Hawaii. I got a really good scholarship that I was offered there. And so I moved out there, and believe it or not, people always joke, because I'm like, it's something I prayed about before going to school, like choosing where I was going to go. I was looking at U of Miami. I was looking at NYU, Pepperdine University in California. And I just really felt called to Hawaii. And a lot of people laugh when I say that, because they're like, well, duh, like it's surfing, it's hot, it's paradise. Like who wouldn't feel called to paradise, And I remember telling my friends, having a going away party at my parents' house, just saying like, I know there's a bigger purpose and there's a bigger reason why I'm going to Hawaii, but my visa is going to allow me to be in the United States and go to school. Literally within the first 6 months of being in Hawaii, our dorms, the dorm I was in the downtown campus. And if any of your listeners have been to Waikiki, you'll know that there's 3 main roads that are parallel to the ocean. And the middle road is called Cohio Avenue, and that's where our dorm was. And it was a hotel. Half of it was the Ohana East. It's still there today, and half of it operates as a hotel, and the other half operates as the dorm. And if you stay there long enough, even as a tourist, you'll learn that it has a nickname called Candy Lane. And during the day, you see kids and families and people out doing, the international market. They have their surfboards, they're in their bathing suits, they're going to the beach. And then come sunset, come dawn, that street, that area starts to change a bit. And you start seeing young girls practically half naked, still basically kind of wearing bikinis, but with heels on. And I was 18 at the time. And you have two choices. Like day in and day out, I would see these girls. I would wake up in the morning to go for a surf. I would come home from my night classes. I'd come home from the club at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning at that time, right? And I would see these same young faces. And I was, like I mentioned, I was 18 at the time. And you being a woman, we all know that 14-year-old can put on red lipstick, a pair of their mom's high heels, and a 14-year-old can easily look like they're 18, 19, 20, 21, especially if you're further developed, than others. There are some of those girls. And so I could see that these girls were younger than me, 13, 14, 15 years old, some of them a bit older, like around my age. And I wanted to understand why, why would a girl choose, and if, you're putting quotation mark bunny ears up right now, but why would a girl choose to be in this industry? And whether I believed prostitution was right or wrong, to me was irrelevant. I really just wanted to understand what was going on and how do you end up at 14 years old wearing nothing on the street, advertising yourself basically to strangers. That's how I broke it down as an 18-year-old in my head.
Yeah.
And day in and day out, like I mentioned, I would see these girls. And so you have one of two choices. You can either ignore them if you feel that what they're doing is wrong, or it's uncomfortable for you, or, you think they're making poor lifestyle decisions, and you can ignore them. Or no different than we're all different creatures or habits of creature in some way, right? If you go to a coffee shop every single morning, you're probably going there at the same time almost every single morning, and you'll see similar faces every single morning if you go there long enough. Same thing if you go to the gym. If you go to the gym regularly, if you're there every day, let's say at 9:30 a.m., you're going to start seeing the same faces. And over a period of time, you do the half smile, then a full smile, then you say good morning, and then it's have a good workout, have a good day, whatever. And slowly you start having these micro conversations with people. And I had that choice to make, acknowledging that there's a human there that I see day in and day out. And so it is a much longer story, but in a very safe, approachable way, I was able to bridge that gap and to start having these micro conversations with the girls, not on the streets. It's not a safe place to do that. And so there was a Starbucks that was attached to our dorm, attached to the hotel. And every Thursday night I committed, and sometimes on Fridays, but it was every Thursday night I had committed to going in there to study, do my homework for a few hours. And I would give the barista my credit card and just say, the girls coming in, who they are. If whatever they order, I'm just going to pay for it. Just to bless them, not to need anything in return, want anything in return. But that's how over a period of time, some girls got really annoyed being like, I don't need you to pay for me. Why, who's paying? Why are you paying? Other girls once in a while would say, thank you. Some girls never said anything at all. They just took the freebie and left. But little by little, that's over the consistency. That was the main thing. It was this consistency over a period of time. I was able to start communicating with a handful of them. And so I started to learn back then of their stories and hearing their, these boyfriends that would promise them a dream vacation in Hawaii. And it turned into their literal worst living nightmare of a one-way, no way out. They're now stuck on an island. And as much as we see it as paradise, it was their living hell. The modeling agencies that didn't exist when they showed up, these false promises of job advertisings that were there, the forced augmentation procedures, the traffickers, the pimps who would quote unquote, their boyfriends, take like their kids to school and pick them up, and keeping all of their IDs very, very restricted. What I started to learn is that these women, a lot of them, they were being forced and they were coerced into this situation in one fashion or another. And so I started to learn that the word prostitute that we equate so much with choice was widely being misrepresented. And that the more accurate word to be using was prostituted. And back then, it was years later, probably almost 4 years later, that I was actually introduced to the bigger word, human trafficking. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's what's going on in Waikiki. Like, that's what's happening down there. But back then, movies even like Taken weren't, which is an oldie now, but I'm even older. But movies like Taken hadn't even existed yet. Human trafficking with Donald Sutherland and Ashley Judd, that movie hadn't even come out yet. Like, the issue of human trafficking was barely talked about. It was more being described. So you would hear things like child prostitute. I'm like, there's no such thing as child prostitute. There's children who are prostituted. But child prostitute or child pornography, like, those words don't go together. A prostitute should equate choice. Pornography should equate choice. And when you put a minor in that situation, it's never choice. And I will argue that till the day I die. Right. So it was in hearing their stories. And again, I was 18, now 19 at the time. I was like, if this was me, I would be praying not only that somebody would be coming for my rescue, but I would be praying that somebody would be realizing that I'm actually a victim and that this isn't my choice. Rather, my circumstance has chosen me, but I didn't choose this. This isn't survival of the fittest, or even use my language where we look at, saying, oh, she's just a whore, she's a slut. And at one point, those type of that language I applied to that situation, that circumstance without knowing. And that was just my own ignorance. And so through learning what was actually taking place, that's where I was like, God, if that was me, I'd be praying that someone come for my rescue. I'd be praying that someone would see me as a victim, that they would actually know the reality of what's going on. And so I believe we all have a voice. I really hate, in the charity world globally, really, there's a kitschy phrase called a voice for the voiceless. And I hate that term because I believe we all have a voice. Theirs was just being silenced. And so my mission, my heart was to amplify their stories, to amplify their voices. And I had no clue that it was going to turn into starting an organization 7 years later and doing all of the work in Canada that we've done. And, we've gone on to change legislation federally in Canada a handful of times. I just knew I wanted to do something. And I think that's the power of, if you do something, something might happen. If you do nothing, absolutely nothing will happen. And so even that, I always say to people in business, right? Like, I know this is also a business podcast, and we can talk about that too. It's like, you got to take a chance. And if you do something, it could turn into something, whatever that something is. But if you do nothing and you stay idle, nothing's going to happen. And
that's a life lesson.
It was. And I've applied it over and over again. I've recycled that into so many different areas of my life because of that. And having seen the magnitude of what back then, it was nothing. Like, I did like a prayer walk and I had these circles of people who would support me. And like, it was very green, grassroots, right? Like, that's like guerrilla style. Like, it was very, very grassroots. But eventually I created structure, and I started to create a brand and messaging and a vision and a mission, and we incorporated, and, we started doing all of these things all at the same time. I got my license at the same time. So Freedom and my license in real estate coincided together. I'm 15 years in real estate this year. And Freedom turns 15 years this year as well. So it was like these two things running parallel next to each other. And I was about 25, I guess, something like that.
That is so impressive. I think that I used to be heavily involved in animal rescue, like heavy. So my passion is animals.
I love that.
Pretty sure anybody who watches my stuff knows that.
Yes.
But because I was very hands-on, it broke my heart day after day after day. And it got to the point where I had to remove myself every way except for financially from. Yeah. And I'm wondering if do you experience the same thing?
I have. So Freedom's, because obviously this is a very dark ugly,
Yes.
dangerous, scary topic, like all the way around, and I always say to people, like, if you can imagine it and you can think it, it's happening in any form of human trafficking, and it's pretty effed up to think that, or like to know that, but like, if you can think it, it's happening somewhere to someone. And there's a lot of wild things that I've, of course, been exposed to, so let me just kind of back up a little bit. Freedom structure, what I founded us as Freedom, is there's a really big lack of awareness and education in Canada and even globally at that time around human trafficking is happening. We think it's more of a Hollywood theatrical thing or something that only happens over in Southeast Asia. We see a lot of those movies. And so that's a stereotype of like what we think. And so when I was looking at what was going on in Canada, and it was like, nobody knew what was going on here. It was like, okay, this is it. Like, it starts with education. And, we spoke about, my market predominantly growing up, of course, was the Oakville, Mississauga, Burlington, GTA area. And in that luxury market, I have the honor and privilege of working amongst some of the GTA's most brilliant minds, businessmen, CEOs, and top executives. Well, if you want money from any of those people, again, make it make sense. Like, they have to understand what the problem is, why there's a problem, and then how the money's going to be used. So you can't just say to somebody, hey, give me 10 grand because of this story that I've just shared with you. Even today on the podcast, like if I said to one of your listeners, they heard what I was doing down in Waikiki and the grassroots stuff, I could probably have your heart moved enough where you'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to give you $100. Good for you. Keep going with the work. If I said to you, okay, I want, would you consider, Carrie, to donate $1,000 or $10,000, you'd be like, pump the brakes. What's the issue? I need to understand this more. And so that for me was the mission. I was like, I want to raise the awareness. I want to educate. We're going to be involved with changing policy and legislation, helping the media change their language, as we talked about earlier, child pornography, child prostitute, like the media has to start getting that correct. And so that was back then, and it still is today, is our mandate, is that awareness piece, because you can't fight something that you're not aware exists. And so that became our focus. And then we partnered with all front lines, different safe houses, different rescue mission organizations. We, work with all levels of police, federal, provincial, and municipal. And so the funds that we would raise would go to these certain projects or to help do rescue missions. And over in India, like I've gone into some of these they're brick kilns, but it's literally child slavery and generational slavery where these families are enslaved because they have a debt over their head, or over in the Philippines where the kids are being cyber trafficked in, these shanty towns and they have no money, but you can see these little antennas and it's very easy to spot the places that have internet. Doesn't mean that all are trafficking and abusing children, but you're able to narrow your focus much quicker. And I've been in the Philippines when we've done these sting operations and rescuing, 3 to 6 children at a time. So yes, I've been very close to some of it, and have been, very, front and center. It's very challenging mentally and on your heart to be able to digest all of that on a regular basis. And it's why when you see, or you might not see, but there's, the police and law enforcement that are in these sex crimes unit or, the cyber crime unit where they literally go insane, because they are exposed to some of the most horrific images and videos that they have to watch. Exactly. And I've not been exposed to that, thankfully, but I've read it and I've seen certain things in graphic detail that are very disturbing. So for me, our focus has, like I shared with you, has been on more of that, on the awareness side. So I've not had to be as, I'm going to say, like in that hard space, but it's still very, very heavy, and you have to create certain outlets where you're able to release everything that you're carrying. That's super important. Like we call that debriefing. It's really important that you and the team have those type of outlets. And I would say that's for any, type of charity work or any cause that's, it could be kids without water, like you had mentioned with yours, animals that are being abused, anything that's involves trauma to a victim of any kind, be it an animal or a human, you yourself are also going to need to make sure that you have that debriefing.
Wow. What you're doing is so great. And I feel like most people aren't aware it's existing in your city right now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Like it's everywhere. It's in every industry.
Are you sitting in Hamilton right now?
I'm in Niagara Falls, but like I remember a human trafficking ring going down in Hamilton.
Yep.
I remember a real estate agent getting charged with human trafficking. She didn't get convicted. She was a female, but she did change her name after. Like this is like this is serious. This is real, people.
It is. I mean, and the reason why I was asking where you're sitting, I mean, Niagara Falls is a huge for human trafficking. You know, we could talk the rest of our conversation just about Niagara region where I'm sitting right now. I could easily go online and show you within 500 meters where it's happening. You know, you don't have to go far. Just the other day, 2 guys that were from Oakville that went to one of my partner's high schools. You know, their front page, they're being charged with human trafficking charges. Wow. You know, like people that he went to high school with. It's like, this is much closer than most people realize. I've spent a good 10 years speaking in the high schools all across the GTA because the average age of entry into forced prostitution in Canada is 13 years old. So if you're talking to a 17-year-old, it's already too late. Like they need to be taught in a child appropriate way what to look for, the signs, the grooming, how it happens. And I really believe in empowering children, you know, as opposed to sheltering them, that if you, again, it's all in a child appropriate way. We're not looking to scare the shit out of little kids. We're not looking to traumatize, you know, but if you explain and they understand, then they actually become informed. And when that little red flag happens, if it does, you know, then feel as well that there's a safety space for them to come and speak to the parent or come speak to an adult. Right? Versus, oh my God, I've done something wrong.
Yeah. There's a lot of shame involved, right?
There's a lot of shame involved. Exactly. You know, and so we want the opposite to happen with our children, you know, whether it's a parent, a guardian, an adult, a teacher. You want to have that safe space where they're like, you know, I just got this message on Snapchat and I think it might be this, you know, and if they don't know what to look for, then they just continue that conversation with that individual. And, you know, it can have plenty of stories. I had a woman reach out to me on Instagram from Oakville telling me right now, she still doesn't have her daughter back. This was about a year ago. And I got RCMP involved. We got different levels of police. I won't say too much because you know, but that's just through Instagram going, we think our daughter might be being trafficked. There's this older guy who, you know, is her boyfriend, wants to get married, and we're not allowed to see her. Like all of these restrictions and the brainwashing had already happened at this point. And, you know, it does. I could tell you so many stories. Like it happens every day, everywhere.
Oh my goodness. Well, good for you. What do you think? Like, I know I brought up the downside of being involved and directly involved in this, but like, let's talk about the upside. Like, how does this, I assume this fills your cup in some way. Let's talk about the good aspects and how it flows over to other areas of your life in a good way.
Well, I mean, we've helped to rehabilitate many different victims across the GTA, and some I've had the privilege to do that more side by side with. And those are your like big wins where you're like, this is why I'm doing this, because for, you know, every 10 steps forward you might take in this fight, there's a lot of setbacks and then it's propelling forward. And so, you know, when you see one life changed, and for me, this is how it's actually been since day one. I'm like, if we can just save one, if we can just rescue one, then it's worth it. You know, I really believe that when you've changed one person's life, you've changed the world because you've changed their world. Like we all know when your world's not going well, when my world's not going well, you're not paying attention to what's going on in Israel or Gaza or the Middle East further or in Russia. You're not paying attention to what Putin's saying. You don't care what Trump is doing. When you, and this might not be your current reality right now, and hopefully it's not, but like we've all gone through really hard times in our life, and it's like blinders are on. And so when somebody can come into your life and they change that turmoil, they change that pain, they change that darkness, they change that hurt, and they can walk out and they can start to heal, their entire world changes, like they become a whole new human. And that's their reality of the world. And so that's why I say when you can change one person's life, you've changed the world because you've changed their world. And for me, that's just what it's always been, is like, if we can just do the one, and I think a lot of people, when I think about business, there's a lot of people that will attach themselves to something for business because they want to get more clients, and they want to look like they're giving back. And I always joke and say, I'm like, at the end of the day, if that's your reason only, I mean, you're still helping. Even if it's self-serving, you're still actually making a difference in some way. I think in business, especially today, especially since cancel culture, because that's something more relatively new for all of us in the last 4 years, is showing up and being your authentic self. And so, when you speak with somebody, you can tell if they're passionate about whatever it is. And so it's like, don't just align yourself with something because you think it's the trend, or you think that's something like, maybe your market is more aligned with. Like, let me tell you, when I think of Oakville and Southeast Oakville, and I think of like bougie, high-end, whatever, you don't really think of a dark, ugly topic. Like, like there's much more, like clean water is a really good one for Oakville, like, or high-end people, like, Habitat for Humanity, another really good one. But I'll tell you the difference. I've gotten people who have called me to say, we want you to come and list our home because we've been watching what you've been doing in the community for all these years. And we really commend you for your work. And we can tell you're passionate about it, and we can tell that it's real. And that for me is like the takeaway, is like, people want to align themselves with people who care. They give a shit. Yeah. They're not faking it. And so there's a cause for everything, literally everything, including unicorns that don't even exist. Like,
yeah.
So,
and there's different levels to how people can get involved.
100%.
You can be in the dirt, in the trenches, doing the thing. You can be bringing awareness. You can be, donating money. You could be donating time. Like, there's so many ways. Just get involved in something. Absolutely. I love what you're doing. I feel like any way I could support you with my platform, like, just reach out, because like, that's my level of comfort, right? Like, I feel like that's what I can bring to the table that will probably make the most difference, right? So please don't, hesitate to reach out.
Thank you.
So yes, Parliament, real estate, which one do you enjoy more?
You really kind of can't compare them, truthfully. Like, advocacy and business are like wildly different, wildly different. And you brought it, like, freedom and advocacy, like, fulfill my heart. I wouldn't necessarily say like selling luxury homes is a fulfillment. Like, that's not, like, nobody needs a $2 million home. Nobody needs, even though that's just like dirt in the Oakville market these days. Like, nobody needs a $10 million listing. I just actually sold one. It just firmed up the other day. Clients of ours that purchased on Lakeshore for $9.5 million. They don't need that. Like, I don't go, I'm like, yes, that's a great day. It's a great day at the office. And I'm very grateful. I'm grateful for my clients and for the opportunity to serve them. But that's not purpose for me. It's much bigger, but I love business. I love talking to especially other women in business, talking business strategy and growth and scaling and branding. And especially as a female, I think it's so important. And so I'm very passionate about talking and building and helping other women do that. But I wouldn't necessarily say like the core of that is real estate, because obviously business is business. Like, you can translate that into any other industry. It's just something that, real estate I'm good at because I think I'm good with people. And I think if you and again, people feel if you're genuine or not, if they can feel that you're just in it for the money, if you're in it for that check, especially today, like I'm 15 years in the industry. It was not 1 in 3 people were realtors when I first got my license. Now it's like, I can, you go out to a restaurant for dinner and it's like half the restaurant you feel like are realtors, especially if you're in Toronto. And so it's like, there's a lot of choice today.
Yeah.
There's a lot of choice around like who you could align yourself with. And so, I always say we're in a service business. We're not in a sales industry. And I think that's where a lot of realtors get it wrong, is that they think that they're selling. They think they're in the sales industry. And I'm like, no, you're actually kind of in hospitality. Like you're in a service industry. You're there to serve your clients. And so that's the difference. And I think because I have that mentality, it's part of why I've been successful in my little nook, if you will, in real estate.
Absolutely. And I'm not surprised to hear you say that is what you love doing, is supporting women. Like both of those paths are coming together at that point, right? How about which has been harder, negotiating real estate deals or changing the way that things are happening in Parliament and getting these changes made around human trafficking?
Definitely Parliament Hill. Definitely Parliament Hill. I mean, like, don't get me wrong. I mean, I always say there's never a dull day in real estate, and it's not an easy industry, especially now. It's very challenging. And this year alone, I had my 2 hardest deals of my entire career happen this year. One in the fall and one in the summer, which is they were just wild stories. And when I compare that to the blood, sweat, and tears of Parliament Hill, it does not compare. That is much harder changing legislation is a very challenging thing, but before you even have the opportunity to do that, you're trying to get the public on board, and you're petitioning, and you're doing a lot of talking and speaking engagements to educate people on like why this needs to happen. You want to get the media involved to raise that awareness. You're trying to get votes in the House of Commons, even though like I'm not in government, like I've not in that official capacity, but you're calling certain members of Parliament to say, we really would love your support, whether you're conservative or you're liberal. I'm like, it does not matter. This is a life issue. This isn't a party issue. Right. And so we really, and not to get political, but there is a major discrepancy between especially at the time, and, the majority of our work, or I'm going to say, the majority of our work was under the Harper government before the Trudeau government came in. And so it was very, very different then with the Liberals and their viewpoints on human trafficking. I shouldn't say it's very different. I mean, Trudeau still carries much of the same and has overturned actually some of the legislation that we put into place, which is very disheartening. But, you're trying to change a mindset. Like I shared with you, I had my own perception. I had my own mindset when I was younger. And that was made up of the environment and society and how I grew up, how we all grew up, in thinking that when you saw a girl like that out on the streets, it meant all of the things: poor decisions, she's a whore, she's a slut, bad circumstance. All of these things that we applied, when you looked at that, it's 99.999% of the time, it is the complete opposite. Even the police, how many police we've had to retrain, like talk about unprogramming, like, and retraining the mind. When a police officer sees a girl there, and at the time, like, these girls were being arrested and charged. And we're like, why are we charging victims? But they didn't see them as that either. And so they wouldn't treat them well either because of that. Like, you see them as a criminal, as whores and sluts who are criminals. And so it was like, we spent years going into all these different police departments and the drugs and crime unit to educate them. And, it's hard. It's hard once you have a mindset and a belief in anything to unprogram that and reprogram it. It takes a very long time. So
good.
That is my long answer to say.
Good for you, though. Like, that takes somebody special to do that. And you might just have more patience than anybody I've ever had on this podcast.
Well, you know what? Again, I think it's like when you have a mission and you have a vision that you believe in, right? Like that is like your own conviction. And so that for me was, I still, we still carry it to today, but that was the mission then. It was like, and when you have whatever's on your vision board and you really believe in it and you're convicted by it, it's like, you're all in.
You just do it. Like there's no other option. My poor husband, like I could have $2,000 to my name and $1,000 is going to an emergency vetting for a dog.
Right.
My husband's like, how are we going to eat? I'm like, I don't know, but God's going to take care of me because I'm taking care of all that. Okay.
Yes, exactly. And he did. Look, you're fine.
Yeah. And so I totally get that, but it's also for me translated into business because look what I built. Like I built, like, yeah, you need that kind of passion. So I totally get that. Now let's shift a little bit. AI for realtors. So do you agree that it's important for them to start using it and learning it?
100%. Wow. 100%. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
What are you guys doing in luxury at Invidiata for, like, are you doing any cool shit like holograms and in $20 million open houses yet? Like what's
no,
we're
not.
How can I bring this to you guys? Because I just feel like you would be my playground.
Well, you know what? Maybe we should collaborate because I'm going to say this and then I want to come back to what your first question was.
Yeah.
But, part of the challenge with some of like the upper end market is that they are a very conservative mindset still, right? Like you're talking about the baby boomer generation where they're very traditional. And so when anything almost too new and advanced is like, no, we don't want to do that. Do you know how many times we've been approached for, you mentioned it earlier, like $1 million listing and all these different selling Toronto, like selling Sunset, selling New York, like all of these, like, these multi-million-dollar home real estate shows. And 90% of our clients are like, not interested. Like they're very private, very different than the Americans who have wealth, where they're like, yes, please come look at my mansion. I want to be on TV and showcase it, right? Like that's generally the American market. Generally speaking, that is not our market. They're more reserved in that regard. So we haven't done anything like that. And again, my father, 40 years in real estate, my father's still young, but he's not young. My dad will be 65 this year. And I think you probably actually notice this more when you look at some of the older, what we would call like the original, like the OGs or some of the icons in real estate that happen to be older. It takes longer to transition into these futuristic, if you will, because that's how it feels to most of them. These advanced, like I remember when Twitter first came out, Facebook was around, but Instagram was not around. Snapchat is not around. Of course, TikTok not here. And I remember sitting in a meeting with my dad and saying like, we have to be on Twitter because people are going to be buying homes online. Like, and my dad was like, that's never going to happen. And I'm like, no, it is. And you can't be foolish and blind to think that that's not going to happen, because it is, because there is a group of young people who are very comfortable on the internet that are rising up and are going to have this wealth passed to them. And they aren't going to be phased at all about buying online. And literally 3 weeks later, my father and I were in Burlington showing a property on the water. And I think it was the seller was present. This is going back so long ago, so I'm a little foggy on the story. But the point is, it was like the seller that was, I think, present that day just told us that he had purchased a property in Calgary online. And I was like, shut up. I'm like, say that louder. I'm like, you purchased it online? He's like, yeah, I saw it on Twitter. He's like, and I put in an offer. And I was like, do you see, Dad? I'm like, and did you see the house? He's like, no. And so I share this story because when you asked me initially, like, if you're, using AI and do I think agents should be using it? It's the same principle that society evolves as technology evolves, as industries evolve. Even the real estate industry has been slower too. Yeah. Okay. The industry has, but it is going to. And so if you refuse, if you don't, you're going to just be left behind. And so it's getting behind the times, whether you agree with it or not. Like, we opened up our conversation here today and you talked about doing a deep dive using AI to come up with the bio and write the bio for your introductions for your guests, but not doing it for, the questions because you like to formulate them.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a really great balance and usage, right, around AI. But it's like, even me, I'm researching something down in Tampa right now, okay, for another business for investment stuff. I'm like, I could totally spend all the time doing it myself, or I popped it into Chat GPT and I asked it, and within seconds, like all of the information is there. And so, like, is that considered cheating? No, I think it's being smart, and so it's learning how to work smarter, not harder, and being efficient with your time. And then also just being like honest. Like if you're gonna say like you wrote that, okay, well then that's like too far. But like, I use it for descriptions on properties. I'm not a freaking writer. And when you become a realtor, you have to be all of these things unless you're on a team. Like thankfully I am, I don't have to be a graphic designer. I don't have to be a web person. I don't have to upload my photos. Like there's things I don't have to do. But if you're an agent coming into the industry, you have to do all of these things. Yeah. And so why wouldn't you utilize AI to help you build a website? Because let me tell you, I would be doing that. Like, I don't want to write a website. I don't know how to do that there as well. It's not my area of genius. And so I think there's many ways that AI can support your business proficiency, but then also helping you to evolve in the industry.
Absolutely. I think that we need to have a call after this because I have so many ideas on how somebody like you and your dad, I think he might be open if I were to position use cases to increase the unique value proposition for the client specifically. Yep. We're not looking for exposure because we're looking at a different demographic. We're looking for a unique experience. So let's have a call after this.
I'd love to. Yeah.
Very last question before we have to go. What is the one tech tool you can't live without?
Besides my phone? I feel like that's like a really lame response, but I'm like, my whole life is in this thing. Like, I mean, okay, as of right now, and I'm like opening my phone to like look at it, I would say for sure Calendly.
Oh my goodness.
Love Calendly.
Good one.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's the best thing when somebody is like, what's your availability? I'm like, boom. It's so easy. And still I would say like Chat GPT is one of my favorite still go-to apps.
Oh, I love that. Me too. It's probably the AI tool I use the most as well. I don't care if it's a lame answer. It just is what it is. Shay, you are such a great guest. I appreciate you coming on and sharing everything that you did today. I really appreciate you. And I really look forward to connecting after this. I feel like I got to know you on this podcast. And thank you so much.
Me too. Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to everything they never told you about real estate. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. To connect with Carrie or for more information about her coaching program, check out carriesoave.ca or at Carrie Soave and Associates on Instagram and TikTok. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.